thank you, and good evening. Thank you for joining Clark Center's newest series, Focus On. I'm Jill Williams, the director of Clark Center NYC. Let me give a huge thanks to the Clark Center NYC board, LMCC, and our generous friends for their support. When Clark Center began at the West Side branch of the YWCA in 1959, it offered a wide array of classes, not only in dance, but in music, theater crafts, lighting design, costume design, scenery, stage, and even stage and TV makeup. We can only assume that Alvin Ailey was attempting to recreate Lester Horton's dance theater in Los Angeles, where Mr. Ailey's career began. In a sense, this series brings us full circle in celebrating the diversity of artists who developed at Clark Center then, and the emerging artists who we would like to recognize today. We'll be focusing on the arts professionals each month who will have an opportunity to talk about their work, their lives, their vision. Listen, watch, and be inspired as they tell their stories. To tell you just a little bit more about this series, I'd like to introduce dancer, artist, curator, and founding member of Clark Center NYC, Ramona Candy.
Thank you, Jill, and welcome everyone. Good to see you in virtual land. As Jill says, what we'd like to do is, because Clark Center was a big supporter of all the arts, we thought it would be nice and important to focus on people who make art happen. That's visual artists, dancers, administrators, historians, musicians, the whole gamut of artists. And we're excited to be able to present to you these various artists, one every month. So please stay tuned to who we're doing next. But today, I would like to say our presentation, our first presenter is Hermes Torres. And to let you know, this is going to be a strictly presentation. So if you have questions, please put them in our chat, and we hope to have time at the end to respond to your questions. But our first presenter today is Hermes Torres. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Hermes. Hermes Torres was born and raised in New York City of Puerto Rican parents. He has been creating art since his youth, attended the High School of Art and Design and the Fashion Institute of Technology, earning a BFA in Advertising and Graphic Design. He later received his MFA in painting from City College. Hermes has exhibited nationally and internationally, and his works are in collections in the Caribbean and Europe. And he continues to create his works in his studio based in Spanish Harlem, El Barrio, New York City. Hermes is also an athlete with over 40 years of experience in dance and the Olympic sport of judo. Hermes says, "My involvement in dance, martial arts, and metaphysics informs my paintings with particular attention to space, color, texture, movement, and emotive gesture." He says he finds his imagery to be universal in its appearance. "The essence of my work stems from the purity of form that expresses through me. I usually work on several pieces concurrently. The dialogue that transpires between the works in progress compels my subconscious to investigate how best to translate that spiritual vocabulary through artistic form." So we are going to welcome our first presenter to focus on multi-talented, multi-disciplined, martial artist, painter, metaphysical practitioner, educator, dancer. What more is there? We're going to start with Hermes. I'm going to welcome Hermes Torres to focus on. So Hermes, why don't you come on? And we're going to start by letting you do a little introduction. But I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you to say when you end your introduction is, how did you realize you were all that? That's a lot. How did you realize you were all that? But go ahead, Hermes. Let me let you take it away.
Well, first, I want to say thank you, Jill. Thank you, Ramona. Thank you, Nidal, for your technical support. And thank you, all board members of the Clark Center NYC. And I really want to thank Clark Center past and present. It was a wonderful experience I had back when I was taking dance in Clark Center, and has made me be here today. To answer your question, when did I really realize all of that? I don't know. I'm still realizing it. People have asked me, when did you realize you were an artist? You know, when did you make that conscious decision? And I don't know if I really made a conscious decision. I look at it as, when does a toddler know exactly when to start walking? It just happens because it's part of that internal system, right? I always say, you don't become a king or a queen because you're crowned a king or queen. You are crowned a king or a queen because you were born a king or a queen. And the same goes for an artist. You don't label, say, I am an artist and become an artist. You already had that within you. So to answer your question, it was something that was very intrinsic, very organic, very natural, like curiosity. And I still hold that curiosity. I still hold that sense of that newness, that blank space in mind where everything becomes new and joyful and exciting, and wherever I am, in whatever environment I may find myself to be.
Well, thank you for answering that question, but I'm going to let you now take it away and
sure.
present your work and yourself the best way you do it, which is phenomenally. So I'm going to put myself on mute and I'm going to disappear for a minute, but I will pop in if I have a question or so.
Sure.
Okay.
Great, that'd be great. Okay, so good evening, everyone. I want to thank you also for being here, taking the time to be here this evening, and to have a conversation about my work and my inspiration. So the first series, or the first conversations that I have are with, I call faces. I tend to do a lot of faces, whether I'm on the phone, as doodles. I have hundreds and hundreds of facial expressions, or what I call caras. And they just come, again, very intuitively, very naturally. Some tend to be a little more mystical. Some tend to be just more realistic. But that's kind of my go-to, where it just comes out naturally and it's very expressive of who I am, or who I may be talking on the other side of the phone. If I'm having a conversation and I have a piece of paper, 11 by 14, 9 by 12 in front of me, I begin to doodle, and it may be an expression of the energy that's being exchanged. We can continue moving on to the next visual. Again, a series of faces. Here's another one. These are black and whites, 14 by 17, ink, and acrylic. This one's a larger one. And again, these just come very intuitively, very natural. It's a kind of an image that I get in my head, in my psyche, and I just start putting it down. I never pre-plan or pre-organize or kind of do references before I start any work. I just move forward with my impression, with my inspiration. And we can just continue moving through. These are my more recent ones. I had some silver paper, 14 by 17, I think, around that size. And I had some black and white acrylic paint, and I just attacked the paper to see what would come out. And this is what manifested. And like I said, I have hundreds and hundreds of these faces. Like, they go anywhere from 5 by 7 to, 40 by 50. All right. And this is the same. I don't call my artwork series. I don't work in series. I work in conversations. Because in my head, it's like entering a room full of people. I'm invited to a party, and there are all these individuals around, and I strike up a conversation with different individuals or different groups of people. And as I speak with them, I make discoveries about them, who they are, how they are, and they reciprocate that information in some way back to me. And that's how I work. So I call my work, I have conversations. Okay, and we can move on to the next series, which is my more in-depth series.
So, Hermes, I have a question for you, don't mind.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, in looking at your faces, do you tend to think that they resemble someone in your life once you've done them?
Could be. Sometimes I see myself in every once in a while, oh, a jawline or whatever. Or it could be an energetic, a spiritual energy that may have, I picked up on or whatever. But sometimes they do. Most of the times, not really.
Thank
Not
you.
really.
Okay.
Mhm. And as we move on to the next conversation of work, okay, this work I've been holding this conversation for 20 years or more. And it really has to do with ancestral legacy. I believe that all the wisdom and all the energy, the love, the joy, the hardship, the tears, the laughter that our ancestors have experienced lives within us in our DNA. And it's a way of me honoring that. And I have this whole work of visual expression that deals with ancestral legacy. And this is just 2 of the 5 of this particular conversation. And it works on paper. This is about 6.5 feet by 4 feet. They're powdered graphite, screen print, raffia, cowrie shells, link chains, and beads. The bones, the representation of the bones as screen printed, represent the information or the DNA that's locked within us, the wisdom of our ancestors. The link chain for me represented the generational link, one generation to the other, giving off the information and coming right back again. The rebirthing of that information, of that wisdom. The raffia represents the veil of mystery between us and that spirit world where our ancestors live. The cowrie shells are the mouthpieces. In many traditions, they use cowries as the mouthpiece of spirit, and they do divination with them. And that's the way I created this. And by no means that I pre-planned it that way. How it happened was I just had a piece of paper up against the wall, and I had some powdered graphite, and I had this feeling in my core that I needed to take this and just start working on this paper. And I just trusted my intuition, and I took action, and this is what manifested. And it worked out. The conversation between what I was doing and how the piece was manifesting kept going back and forth until it developed into what you see here today. And this is 2 of about 5 that I have of this particular look. And I continue this work in another visual expression. If we can move on to the next. Here are 2, male and female ancestral energy. This is gold leaf on burlap. This is 6 by 4 on a burlap sack, like a big giant potato sack. It's a sack. And I had all these burlap in my studio, and I just got the impression that, again, put it up on the wall, and I just went at it. Something within me moves, and I just take action. I just take action to follow it. Okay, I trust it. I know that it will manifest into something. And this is what came out. And this is all gold leaf in the background and acrylic. And it really is meant to be freestanding because it's a sack. Think of a paper bag, but it's made out of burlap. And it's supposed to be slid over a armature so that it stands in space as opposed to hang on the wall. Because as it stands in space, it alters our perception of where we stand, who we are. How close is that ancestor to us? It invades our space. It moves as part of our space, so we cannot avoid it. Whether we choose to believe it or not, they exist, and their presence is seen. On the backside, I covered it with raffia and ribbons and cowrie shells, and that's the backside. Each one is like that, and I knotted the raffia. I took string, I got raffia, and I knotted it. All part of a sense of meditation, a sense of prayer to the ancestors. Okay, so as I sat there and I knotted the raffia, it became a prayer, a communication, a communion with those who went before me and are giving me the inspiration to do this work. Right? So this is the backside. So on the front side, you will see the figurative with the gold leaf, and on the backside, as you walk around it, you will see this, okay? The red ribbon represents the bloodline. The black represents the mystery of where the ancestors. And this is a view of my my studio. When I'm working and I'm busy, everything gets all, you know, around me. It's almost like I'm consumed by it. And it's every moment, every second, it's a constant thought, it's a constant expression. And I say it's a curse and a blessing, because there is not one moment that I process life that some form of creativity enters my beingness. So it's a constant inspiration. So that's just a view of my my studio. And this is just to give you a kind of a scale image of how big the piece is as compared to myself, okay? And what you see behind the ancestral legacy is another work that I finished right before, a little before the pandemic started. And I have the image coming up next, and it's a wall of, it's of raffia. Well, oh, this is another one that I have here. When the pandemic started, I didn't go to my studio. So what I chose to do was to bring some work to my home. And this is me sewing the edge of the piece that I was working on. And my intention as I did the work that was that with each thread that I pushed through that burlap was a prayer for humanity, for healing, so that we can be united in love and peace. And I sewed by hand the whole edge of the 4.5 by 6 feet burlap. And the image is gold leaf. The background is black acrylic. This iridescent glitter to create the globes. And this is part when it was almost finished. I had to hold it up and to see how I would view it and what changes I would make. But that's it. And I sewed all the red all around the edges, bit by bit, in prayer while the pandemic was taking place. All right. And this is the one I was making to reference earlier about the wall of raffia. This came to me again from spirit, from somewhere inside of me, to create a wall of raffia. Having the viewers or the participant who came to view it tie a cowrie shell as a form of prayer on the raffia. So when it was all through, it would become a communal prayer to create a synergistic effect in the energy of all those prayers. And my intention was to bring it from community to community in one area. And it's about 7 feet long, 8 feet long by 6.5 feet high, something like that. And my intention, like I was saying, was to bring it to different communities and have viewers, children, adults, whomever, tie a cowrie shell to one of the raffias as a form, as an indication of prayer. And it would become this wall of raffia and cowrie shells. But unfortunately, the pandemic hit, and it's wrapped up in my studio in the closet right now until further notice, you know. So as you can see, this whole series of ancestral legacy, ancestral conversation that I'm having is about acknowledging the past, translating it into who I am in my present state of being in my society, so that it can continue moving forward. You know, just as language changes, just like fashion changes, the wisdom of our ancestors change in accordance to our capacity and our potential. And that's how I am expressing what I express. All right. And we can move on to the next section, which is the series Madonnas. Again, in my studio, I had this black and white image in my head. I took the white paper, I had black paint, acrylic paint, and I just went at it. This is about 5 feet, 4x5 or something like that, acrylic. And it has to do with the Virgin Mary, the Black Madonnas, you know, La Madonna Negra. And there's a saying I grew up here, my grandmother saying La Tres Maria. So these are the three Marys, all symbols representing water, the female water, the shape, you know, of femininity. I'm really, really acknowledge the divine feminine in everything, whether it's male or female. There's a divinity that is feminine within all of us. And that is expressed also through the work that I do. And this is one of the images, along with the next one that's going to be shown. The next one is a larger one that's about 5.5 feet by 5. It's almost a square. And this is called Black Madonna Birthing, or Madonna and Child. And again, acrylic on white paper and black glitter and iridescent glitter. The black glitter represents the unknown, the womb where everything is held until it's birthed forward. And then when it's birthed forward, it comes out into light. In Spanish, we say, la mujer dio a luz. The woman gave to light. She gave light. When she gives birth, we say she gave light. So the iridescent circles represent the light coming forth from that womb, like in the darkness, the unknown, the mystery of life. And the divine feminine has the power to push it through and express it to us in our own special way. So this is just one of the pieces of I think about 6 that I have in this kind of style, kind of abstract, very graphic, very simple. And I would like to say that I continue to work on these. I mean, I stop. It's like, you know, you're going to that party, you're having a conversation with someone, and then you say, oh, hold on a minute, I want to say hello to somebody else. And then you go and you have a conversation with somebody else, and then you come back to where you left off, and then you continue. And that's the way I see my work. That's like how I work concurrently in many works at the same time, you know? So we move on to the next image, which is also Madonna, but this is more representational. And this one is interesting enough. I was walking through, I think it was the Bronx, and there was this piece of plywood there. And I'm like, oh my God, you know, I can use this. And I picked it up. And as I picked it up, I got a Byzantine image in my head. And I'm like, okay. So I gessoed the wood, and I proceeded to create this female face. Now, this piece took me a very long time. She was not having it. She was not talking to me for a long time. So I would do the work, I would put it away, come back, I'll put it away. And then I got the impression each one of those beads was placed one by one to create that halo. So again, it's that meditative, prayer-like state of being when I create. So I went out, purchased beads, a sequence, and I glued down each sequence to create that halo. And then it stopped. Then she wouldn't talk to me anymore. And then I put it aside. Then once again, I got the impression, how am I going to create the background? I remember growing up, and at one point we lived in the basement. There was a tin ceiling that some apartment buildings had. So I ordered tin ceiling. I ordered the tin that would be on the ceilings, and I cut it to be the background of the Virgin. Then I purchased fabric. I imprinted the image, the design on the fabric. I ordered beads. And I just kept on going as she grew, as she talked to me. You know, I followed, and that's I created. It's about, let me see, about maybe 4.5 feet tall, something like that, 4 or 5 feet tall. So it's a big piece, and it's heavy. So and I love doing work like that, very, very intricate, very meticulous, Byzantine-like, very layered with information and stuff. And there's another one that I've worked on also.
Hermes, can I just ask
Yes,
you a question? I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
sure.
This whole presentation feels like I'm in prayer. I just want to let you know that. But I wanted to ask you, why did you choose that tin roof, the tin ceiling background for the first Madonna? Because that that ceiling reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen. You
Well,
know, we all grew up with that kind of ceiling somewhere. I was just curious why you used that.
exactly. It's that memory of that again, it's that ancestral connection, that memory that we have of how I grew up. My grandmother had it. I lived in the basement for a short while. My parents, they lived, you know, they had that tin roof,
Mhm.
um, basement apartments. So it just, you know, sometimes um, our memories come to the forefront. Our childhood memories, our grandmother's memories speak through us. Um, and it just came about, you know. And I still want to work more with it. I still have another big piece there, but as circumstances are, you know, you're doing life gets in the way. You're like, okay, I got to put it aside. But I still want to work with that tin, which brings me back also to in the beginning. You saw the faces with the silver background. That triggered also that kind of sense of a memory, you know.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, what if I would take that silver heavy paper and embossed it
Mm.
to create that? So again, it kind of all kind of connects, as you
Right.
can see.
Right.
You know, it all runs through that memory. The memory that lives in ourselves never leaves us.
Right.
It
Well,
just
thank you.
each you know each ancestor or each individual, each spirit, whatever you want to call it, comes to the forefront and says, "Oh, wait a minute, I want to have a conversation with you."
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Feel
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Thank you. Well,
Hmm.
you can continue with the Madonna piece.
Sure, sure.
I'm curious about the next one.
Eh, there's a Madonna that I used to hear when I was younger, called La Dolorosa, the Virgin of Sorrows.
Hmm.
Okay. Again, that name comes to my head. I'm in my studio. I hear La Dolorosa. I'm like, okay. So I just start drawing. I have no idea where I'm going with it. I just start again. I start with the face. I start with the eyes. I kind of, you know, play around with the veil. You know, and I just keep moving. And I want the beads. I don't want beads. I want nails, and the nails represent the sorrow. So the halo is made part of nails. This was when it was on, still not totally finished. And then again, the beads, the silver iridescent beads that I strung together and I glued as part of the halo. Okay. Again, a dolorosa. There you go. And the background is a gold leaf. So I took the gold leaf, I pressed it down step by step. And you know, it's again that patience, that meditation, that one by one. And I, as an artist, like to see things done quickly. Like I have the image in my head. So just as I quickly as I see that image in my head, that's how fast I want to express it and do it. But being a human being in the world, I know it takes time. So sometimes the work may take me, you know, some abstract work may take me a day. Other work may take me years. I just never know. For example, this one behind me that you see here, I just right here, that took me months to do. And it's an older painting. It's about 20 years old. And it's the Saint Sebastian. And I use words on it because I'm also interested in the use of words and how culture uses words to get into trance, whether it's through chanting, prayer, when you say the rosaries, the repetition of the Hail Mary, the Our Father, to move into that state of blissfulness or connection with spirit. So this is a Saint Sebastian's prayer repeated over and over and over again as a form of a chant. So that I just might as well add that guy in, you know. And we can move on to the next thing, which is screen printing. This is a 6 foot by 4 foot paper, screen printed. And it's, again, words from the Bible, images of Christ, images of the Virgin, the chalice. And this was very organic, very free flowing. overprinting, and I called it "You Hypocrite," because there is, if I can remember correctly, somewhere in the Bible that says, don't criticize other people, look at the, thing in your eye, the log in your eye, the speck in your eye. And I think it's in Luke or something like that. So I use that, don't be a hypocrite, don't be so hypocritical about life. Look at yourself, love, send love out. So that's how that came about. And many times when I start the work, I really don't know how it's going to be expressed or how it's going to be received. Okay. This I started, and that's as I started working on this piece, it started saying, oh, call it the hypocrite, call it the hypocrite, call it. And I kept hearing that word. I'm like, okay. And then as I read what I had printed down as from the biblical text, it was that one about, don't criticize others, look at yourself. So it was already speaking to me before I even finished it. And the next one is also a screen print of a photo I took in Nigeria in July of 2001. I had traveled to Ile-Ife in Nigeria for some ceremonies. And this is one of the photographs that was taken. And I screen printed it and I overprinted it, because it was in the bush, what they call Igbodu, which is the sacred grove. And, so I just layered it with all that energy that I felt that I was moving through, that life energy, but people call it prana, some people call it ashe, some people call it, ki or chi. So all of that was pulsating around me. So I layered that as best as I could and tried to express it in this screen print that I just did. So these are two forms of, the Christianity and the earth-based shamanic traditions. How do they speak to each other? How do we speak with it? How do we interpret it? And that's how I did those two, and I put those two side by side just to show, the diversity in our humanity, And then the next series that I had was it's a series of black and white and the abstracts. And these are about 48 by 52, something like that. On canvas, acrylic. This one is called Beloved, Bitterness, and Rebelliousness. How did that come about? I started working on it. During this time, if I remember correctly, I couldn't really dance. I had a hip replacement, and I really couldn't be moving around as much as I can. So I think the sense of movement was expressed in the work that I was doing at that time. So I was doing the work, and I heard the name Maria, as in the Virgin Mary. And I'm like, oh, that's so boring. How, what am I gonna call it, Mary? So in my head, I heard, well, what does the word Mary mean? And it means beloved, bitterness, rebelliousness. I looked it up and I was like, oh, how interesting is that? So that's what I called it, And then the next one, again, a black and white, same size. I started doing the circles. It was at that time, a lot of circles were coming out of me or being expressed through me or being moved through me. And this one's called Dismas and Gestas. These are the two guys that were crucified next to Christ. Gestas was on the left, Dismas was on the right, representing Gestas means to moan, to complain. And the other one, it means to, accept life and repent. So as I was doing that, those two names came to my head, and I just, I titled it that, Why go against the grain? It's already been given to me. Go with it, you know. And then the last one, well, one of the next to last one in this section is Golgotha, which is the Mount of Skull, or the skull hill, the hill that looks like a skull. So again, in the middle of working with it, I heard the name, I titled it. Why? I really don't know. I'm just the vessel through which the information comes through, and I express it as it needs to be expressed. And I always say, as I create, that it's not really about whether people like it or don't like it. I'm just a messenger. I put it out there, and whether the viewer likes it or dislikes it, something has touched them, because it was strong enough for them to say, I don't like that. And it was strong enough for them to say, I like that. So my job is to express it, speak the language, you know. And painting or visual arts is just one of the many ways I do it. I write, I dance, you know, I'm always doing something. For me, there is no excuse not to create. You know, being tired, being in pain, being whatever, is not an excuse not to create. You know, I could find something, I could find a piece of paper, I find my t-shirt, and I will make something out of it. That's just my character, that's my spirit, that's who I am. As we move on, I want to leave a little, and the time we're going to do a little bit more, and then if anybody has questions, we can answer that. The next one's the abstracts and the oils. These are 6 by 6, 6 inches by 6 inches, that is, oil stick, okay? And this, I do at home. You know, there were times when I didn't have a studio. Right now, I had recently closed down my studio in Harlem, right? And so I took my small canvases, I took my oil sticks, and I started to create small works like this. This is an earlier work. This is about maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And we can just move through these because they're just abstract movement, color, you know. And for me, this is about a narrative. And what do I mean by that? When you see a piece like this from afar, because you're small, again, the intimacy, right? The intimacy is going to pull you in, right? You want to look at it closer. But as you get to it closer, you realize that it's not a landscape, that it changes, that it's a burst of color, that it's really a line, that it's a blur, or whatever. And for me, that narrative is what's important. And the story doesn't end. The work is not finished until the viewer has their own story to complete it. You know, so if you see a landscape, then that story is complete to you as what you see it, and the work is completed at that point, right? So just like our relationships, you see a person, you really don't get to know them until you live with them. You really don't get to know them until you have a conversation with them. So this is about that. As you get closer to the small work, you really don't get to see what it's really like until you're up close and you see, oh, wow, that really isn't water. It looks like water, but as I got closer, it was just like a dab of paint. That's, you know, no shape. It's just the shape of a splash of color. So these are about that. Very small. And I love, for me, I love the lushness of paint, the fleshiness of paint. It's almost erotic in the way that it just moves and across the space. You know, it could be a dance, because for me, dance is a painting in motion. You have line, you have color, you have movement, you have design and choreography. So this is all about that. So these small, they're all six inches by 6 inches. I've created about maybe, I don't know, 50 or 60 of them, something like that. I'm not sure. I do them, I put them away with the rest. And I just keep doing them. I just really enjoy it. Sometimes it takes me a day, sometimes it takes me a week, because I keep scraping off and adding on and scraping off and adding on until I feel satisfied. And then the last little section that I'm going to show here before, if anybody has any questions, I'll answer, are these, again, at home artwork, no studio, Manhattan. These are 5x7. I had a bunch of color pencils. I had a few tubes of acrylic and a paper bag. Like I said, not to create is not an excuse for me. I had a paper bag, I crushed it up, and I used it as the subject matter for these small 5x7 paintings. It's colored pencil and acrylic. The bag is color pencil, the background is acrylic, 5x7 on heavy stock paper. And we can just move through these, yeah. I abstracted the shapes, and I love doing these. These are really, really a lot of fun to me. It helps me to train my eye in seeing, helps me about shapes and movement, composition. How big is that bag in that space? Is it going to consume the space? Is it going to be smaller? Is it going to be bleed off? So all of these things come into play as I do them and I do the work. And that's it for the visual. Anybody has any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
This is great, Hermes. Great, great, great. This is more than I even expected. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you.
The work is so filled with spirit and honor and respect for the ancestors and for our planet the way it is. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was, I know a lot of times artists talk about questions that artists get are about what does a painting mean, or what were you trying to show in the painting? And I love what you said about leaving it up to the viewer. The viewer sits back and looks at it and decides what it means to that viewer. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I know a lot of students will ask me that question.
Sure. How do you know when a painting is finished? My students just ask me, well, I don't know. Is it finished? Is it not finished? I said, how does it feel to you? For me, as the world according to Hermes, right? Is for me, it feels complete. Like I said, when it feels right, more than when it looks right. It has to feel, I have to have this sense, this inner sense of satisfaction, like this like, yes, it's complete within me because it feels complete. Not because it may look complete. Some person may come by and say, well, visually it doesn't look like it's complete. You could add a little darker there. You could add a little color there. That can go for infinite amount of ways, right? So it has to feel complete. It feels complete to me at that moment, but I know that it continues to express its own identity by way of the viewer. So the viewer brings their story to the piece, right? And then it becomes this layered richness of information that takes place in that moment. The moment the viewer looks at that art, whether it's a Tintoretto, whether it's a Picasso, whether it's a Puvis de Chavannes, whatever it is, it continues to grow. That's how come painting can be eternal. That's how come there are masterpieces from hundreds of years ago, because it continues to express itself to each individual. Right. And each individual completes the story at that time for them. And they take that memory and that story with them. It's just like dance. I think for me, the beauty of dance is that it's so ephemeral. Mm. The second you make that movement, it no longer exists. It's dead. Mm. All you have is that memory that you take with you, just like a memory of a loved one when they're no longer there. Right. So in dance, for me, that's the beauty of it, that the second you make that movement, the second I make that movement, that I push through space, I know it's ended. It will never be repeated the same way. Mm. And all I have is that memory. Mm. Mm-hmm. Wow. So for me, that's part of the beauty of dance. Yeah, absolutely. That this ever, life and death moment right on stage, mm-hmm. And then when you think about it again, it's a memory of the memory. Right. Beautifully expressing it. I'm going to use that, Hermes. I'm going to use it. Sure. It's not mine. I always say that whatever comes through me and doesn't belong to me, it makes no sense or use to the humanity or the planet if I die or I leave this planet and I don't share any of it with anybody. Okay, gotcha. It served no purpose. Gotcha. Love it.
Well, I hope I'm pronouncing this name correctly. Divinity Ray says, thank you so much for explaining your process and consideration of materials. Your work seems to have multiple conversations happening at once. Do you consider each discussion before you begin a piece, or do they reveal themselves over time?
They reveal themselves. When I start a piece, I start by way of this knowingness within me. That's what I can say, this intuition, this sense of doing something. And it expresses itself as I work on it. Okay, as I work, it expresses itself. And then when it's completed, it may reveal the story to me, different than when I thought it had started. That's the same way with the ancestral legacy, with the raffia and the link chain. I need a link chain. It just feels, it's like when you're cooking, it needs a little more salt, it needs this, and you add the flavor and the layering. And then at the end, you have a beautiful dish, a tasty dish, one that you want to savor. And that's the way it works for me. It reveals itself as it goes, and then the story may change totally at the end and say, this is what we were trying to tell you. You were just not listening.
Okay. Those Divinity responds, the sazon. Thank you.
El sazon, that's right, el sazon.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. As you create anything in the world, you test it, you taste it, you step back. I know for a lot of artists, I myself included, I take a mirror and I look at my piece in the mirror because it looks very different for some reason in the mirror than it looks on an easel. So it's a process, and everybody has their own way of going through that process. Let me see. Eva Yasantawa says, colors, textures, luscious. My mother used to use impasto technique with her oil paintings. I'm just going to read a couple of the comments here. I'm so glad this is being recorded. I hope lots of people get to connect with this work and this artist. That's Eva Yasantawa. Thank you, Eva. Joni and Gus, the work feels very primal. You feel the energy. Leslie says, truly an amazing connection between the spiritual, astral, and the earth plane. Yes, this is extraordinary and so deeply ancestral, spiritual. I love all of this. These are some of the comments I'm seeing here. So
thank you, everybody.
You're touching a chord, Hermes. Anybody else have any questions? I think I want to go back to something, with the black and white pieces that I'm very familiar with. You had them in the show at Clark Center at the Valley. It's so much to me. I don't even see anything but dance in those pieces. It's like a choreography on the canvas. There's so much movement. And you were talking about at the time that you created those pieces, you couldn't dance. So it's just interesting how you couldn't dance in the physical body, but you brought that dance into the paper, because to me those pieces are just pure movement. Pure, you could call it whatever you want, but I see just movement.
It is. I feel it. I mean, that's the way I felt. I'm very physical. I like to be physical, with the dance, with the judo, with all this stuff. I'm very physical, and not to be able to move due to recovery from my hip. I guess it just expresses itself on the camera, and I find that it happens when I don't move. It moves. I move somewhere else. It's displayed somewhere else, and you are correct. You are correct in observing that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. Anybody else have any questions? I mean, there's a lot here, folks. Well, Jill wants to know: do you have plans to exhibit soon, or where?
Not at this moment. Not right now. I trust I will have one soon at some point. And of course, I will post it up. I will let my Clark Center family know, and everybody else, as soon as I come up with one. Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. I just do the work. My wife always say, how much the work? I mean, if you look at my studio where I'm at right now, it's like 40 about 40 6x6 paintings over there. I have this guy here. I have these drawings here. I'm also doing this big one on Osain, which is the deity of herbs and plants and nature. And I started to learn how to embroider on my own. So it's going to be, the foliage is going to be all embroidered. And he's going to be in gold leaf and the whole thing on burlap. I got this thing with burlap and its natural feeling in my hand. I don't know.
That was one of the things I was thinking about is when you were speaking. Where did I write it down? I have to write these notes to myself because my brain is not, I was going to ask you, how does your material influence your work? Because you use so much so many different materials, the gold foil, and the gold foil is so opposite to the burlap.
Mhm.
Gwyneth just says, as the abstract use of a paper bag is unique use and reuse. So you use so many different types of medium or
Right.
media. How do you choose your media? Is it something that just comes to you naturally, or?
It comes organically. I
Mhm.
just, like I say, like I see something, I can see a bottle of water, and I hear a conversation, and how does that bottle of water is expressed together with the conversation? So
Mhm.
words and water and plastic, it just happens organically. I had this, a lot of burlap sacks. I mean, there was 6 feet by 4 feet bags made out of burlap. And I'm like, I'm not gonna throw that out. Are you kidding? You're not gonna use that? Give it to me. and I have so many of them, and I'm like, and I love the way the texture, the feeling, the challenge of how am I going to work on burlap? I've never done it. How is it gonna hold up to the paint? What does it have to do? Like when I was while I'm working on the Osain piece with the embroidery, I was having a really hard time. And thanks to a dear friend by the name of Joseph, who's a designer, fashion designer, and he's like, "Oh, you're gonna have a hard time. Use this, use that at the backing, and this, and that." So I learned something, and I continue to expand on that information, and that's how now I can embroider a little better and easier than, because the needle used to go through the burlap and come on the other side, and the thread wasn't thick enough or was too thick or whatever. So you learn as you go, and I think all artists are really problem solvers, and I believe that every human being is an artist.
Ashe, I believe it too.
Every human being, whether it's the cooking, the dressing, the way they walk, the way they breathe, the way they love, it's all an expression of who you are, man. I mean, you can't get away from it. You can't get away from it.
Everywhere you go, I mean, even if you're walking down the street, you see art. If you're walking down the sidewalk and not looking up, there's art on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
You don't even. I was telling a group of students the other day, they were like, they were. I was talking like, and I said, everywhere you look, the clothes you wear, the pen you hold in your hand, the book bag you have on your back, your hairstyle, your makeup, and that's something that has to be created by someone, but it also is to be appreciated by other people. So it's all an act of creativity, whether you're the recipient or the donor. It's all creativity. So I agree with you that everyone's an artist. It
all is. You can't. You cannot be creative because you come from a creative source. You come from a divine creative source, and you carry that spark of creativity within you because you are an expression of that creative source. So there's no way of getting away from it.
Yeah. Well, you have a lot of wonderful comments. I'm just going to take a few more, and then we're going to probably wrap up if there are no other questions. Gwyneth says again, it's Gwen, my friend, says, burlap is a wonderful material that has profound meanings from the ancestors, the diaspora, all relatable. Evia Santua again says, she's re-quoting you, all artists are really problem solvers and every human being is an artist. I say, you should trademark that now, okay?
See, that was just inspiration right
now. Gwen says, design is a solution-oriented discipline. Iya, I'm not sure the whole name, Iya, Alafia. Francis File says, amazing work, Hermes. You have such respect for you and your work. And then Emma says, have you ever gotten an artist block? And if you do, how do you overcome it?
I work on something else. It's that simple. I'll write, I'll dance, I'll choreograph something. What I did during the pandemic is a friend, you mentioned Fran, one of my dance buddies, I love her dearly. We've been dancing together, I think since 1982 in Clark Center. And we still take class together. And what I did during the pandemic, since I really couldn't do much art, it was limited in the way I did it, but I still created it. Every Sunday I would put on some music and do a little improvisational choreography and send it to my dance buddies, Wow. So it was always something, if I'm not creating one way, I'll create something else. I will write, I will paint, I will dance, I will choreograph, put on music and just choreograph, even if it's just myself, because the movement will open me up. The movement will open me up to where I have to go next. So that's what I do.
Wonderful. I think that's a great way to close this in terms of, there's no such thing as block. If something's blocked one way, you go the other way. If there's a detour sign, you turn to the right. If there's another detour sign, you turn to, or you go back.
Right.
But you never truly blocked. I agree with that, Hermes. I think that's a really great piece of advice. Eva Santo, I love you. She says, thank you for this. This is how I know I live. This is how I live too. We are kindred spirits. Someone said they posted a question. I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Great virtual exhibit, Hermes. Jay Ori says, this is a great virtual exhibit. How does one connect with you to purchase one of your conversations? Do you want to give a website or something?
I have my hermesarts.com website or Instagram, Hermes Arts. Hermes Arts on Instagram. That's probably the easiest and best way to get in touch with me.
Okay.
Hermes Arts.
Go ahead. Hermes Arts.
No, that was it.
Okay, and I just want to say to everyone who's listening who doesn't know how to connect with who wants to connect with Hermes, if you go on our Facebook page, we'll put something up. We'll put his contact info on our Facebook page, and this is recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. So there's a way to watch this again or have your friends watch it again. But we have run out of time. And Hermes, this has been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for being our first Focus On presenter. It was great. We learned a lot, and I think you've inspired so many of us. And this was really an hour from me, an hour of prayer. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's interesting you say that, because I do say my art is my prayer.
Well, this hour has been one for me. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you everyone for taking the time this evening.
Yes, and we'll stay on for a second. I'll stay on for a second, I think. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gwen. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Joni, Divinity, Nina Gale. Thank you. Looking at everybody here. Bye, everybody.